Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Okay, well, we're back here on Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism, and a podcast conversation between myself, Adam Piercy, and Mick Mulroy. So, Mick and I were discussing a topic we were going to start with today, and we're going to jump right into it due to time constraints for both of us today, which was the topic I think is going to start today with the topic of book bans and banning reading materials and things like that. I think even in my home country of Canada, we are seeing this occurring now, which is, I would say, alarming in general. I think, there are some other examples of it happening in the States and some other examples of similar types of bans happening at places both in Canada and the US and around the world right now. And as a Stoic, I think it's an interesting kind of topic to talk about because we generally pursue wisdom of all kinds, see whatever's out there. So, but Meg, I'd love to hear your initial take on this situation right now because it seems to be escalating. I seem to be hearing about this a lot more nowadays.
Absolutely. And the reason why I'm all dressed up snazzy is because I was just on ABC talking about Ukraine and Russia. Which one of those countries do you think bans books? Right? It's not a trick question. You know exactly which one it was. But I wanted to start with just listing some of the books that's been banned in history. Plato's Republic. Pretty much the Bible in about 6 different versions. The Quran. All of Martin Luther's works. Copernicus, Galileo, Voltaire's Candide, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cavern, Walt Whitman's Leaves in the Grass, Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary, Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, Mark Twain's Adventures, James Joyce's Ulysses, probably the best book ever written, D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover, George Orwell's Animal Farm, George Orwell's 1984, J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, Anne Frank's The Diary of a Young Girl. And obviously I could keep going. But those are the books that people couldn't read that ended up being the most significant literary works in history. Don't think that's an opinion. I think that's safe to say that's a fact. So when it comes to the Stoic view on this, and you already started, Adam, wisdom isn't just knowing facts. Wisdom is actually having the ability to change your mind, and you'll never change your mind if you're not exposed to different thoughts, different ways of thinking, and different opinions. So when you ban books, and let's face it, the books that are being banned share a different opinion of those that are banning it. Yeah. That's why they're banning it. So you are taking away the ability for your citizens and children, in some cases, ability to learn and actually have input and make their own decisions on what they believe. And it's children in the United States you referenced. In Florida alone, they banned 4,500 books. DOD, obviously I'm a military person, DOD schools, because that's the federal government can do this. They banned over 400 books for the children, right? So DOD children that go to schools on bases. And then in the academies, so these are adults about to be officers. Yeah. They've banned books. They've banned Maya Angelou's books. They've banned The Color Purple. It's and there seems to be a trend there, to be frank. But ultimately, these are adults. These are adults, and the idea behind it was, well, these are warriors, so they should only read Sun Tzu's Art of War. Well, yes, of course they should read Sun Tzu's Art of War, but warfare isn't so straight and clear cut. It's actually having the ability and knowledge of culture. It's having the ability and knowledge of history, whether you like the history or not, to be a good leader of men in the military situation, and being a good leader of men and women everywhere, right? You have to have knowledge that's not just your own culture's view and not just your own sect of that culture's view in order to be a well rounded person and to form opinions that are real and not simply dogma. So
Yeah, and I think
I'll get off my soapbox.
no, no, but I think we're this is an opinion based discussion, right? So we should be able to talk about these things in that way. But I'll quickly pick on one which you mentioned, which was Sun Tzu. So Sun Tzu, okay, yes, he pushes for practical reading, right, and warfare, but he also stresses understanding the broader strategic landscape, right? He understands. He describes it basically as you have to gather intelligence to understand the terrain, the circumstances. The goal is essentially to know your enemy as well as you know yourself. And you can't do that if you are entirely one dimensional. Human beings aren't one dimensional. I think if Sun Tzu were alive today and someone said, do you support only reading books about warfare, I'm sure he would say no. Like even in warfare, you read book you're going to need to read books probably about geology to understand
Of
different types
course.
of ground for earthworks, right? Like
Yeah.
and I think it's
Sociology, anthropology.
absolutely, and I think that's the one key thing here. But there's a thread that runs through this, right? Which you were kind of picking on, which is the feeling here is that books getting banned are coming from a point of view that is different from somebody's, right? And what's interesting today is I hear so many people say things like, "We can't talk about things. I can't say whatever I feel or think and talk about it." And it's like, well, I agree with that, but I don't think banning somebody else's writing is going to help that. It actually makes it worse, right? We're supposed to
Mhm.
be able to look at these different viewpoints. We're supposed to be able to look at these different viewpoints, discuss them, nitpick them, right? Like I can't remember. I think it's Seneca. He says something like, "If you read something and it's better," and this is Seneca who would read from other schools of philosophy and
Of
look at
course.
them for whatever else could be useful. He would say, "Look, read everything, read anything, right? And if you find something that's better, then do that, right?" And I think there's this thread that's going on right now, which is basically like uh, it just feels like you're hiding something where you're saying like, just don't look in there. I'm telling you what to think, and just don't look in that other place, right? Because it's different from our view, and we don't go in there, we don't look at that, and it's kind of like, well, if your view is so strong, if your view is so good, then it can stand up to the scrutinies that come with getting different points of view. But I'd be curious to know what you think about that, because I think to me that's a thread that's running through, but there might be a thread that you see that's different.
Well, to start with, you make a really good point. Even when the book you read the books of what say allowed you to read, and this is obviously much broader than the military context, but just stick with that for a second on Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu is telling you not to do that. So the very book that you highlight to your midshipmen or your cadets to read tells you the idea of banning the other books is a terrible idea,
Right.
right? And there's a quote by Thucydides, if I pronounced him correctly. I'm mostly read his name, never seen it, heard it said out loud. The society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting by fools,
Right.
right? So again, much broader than just a military context, but since that is something that right now in the United States they can affect um, the easiest, that's
Yeah.
where it's happening. So they're basically changing the idea of a college education, even in a service academy, into one that's not been seen in, I don't know, centuries, right? Where you
Yeah. And
can't
even
actually read certain books. And the one book I'd like to highlight, because it seems sadly ironic, as they can't read, is The Handmaid's Tale,
right.
right? Which is a modern book about a totalitarian society in the United States, written by a Canadian, I might I might
Yeah,
mention
yes, that's right.
where the
Margaret
safe
Atwood.
zones in Canada, right?
Yeah, that's
So
right.
just a way to emphasize, that could never happen. They banned the book, right?
Yeah, I know.
Which basically says, well, perhaps it could happen, right? Because
Yeah,
you don't want people to read about it for some reason that's very unclear to me, because it is not. And the sad part about it, the reason why we're talking about the military stuff is because that's what the federal government can immediately affect. So
yeah.
what if they could affect just libraries across the country?
Hmm.
You don't think they'd stop there? That's the thing. So
Yeah,
it's bad, but it could be far worse if they had the authority. Is what I'm saying.
absolutely. And I think I think the interesting thing is that they this comes from a viewpoint of going back to the originals, going back to the founders, going back to the basics, and you're like, well, George Washington put on plays written by Seneca at, I can't remember what battle it was before he did that. I mean, just after, might have been before crossing. No, I don't remember. No, it was before Bunker Hill. The night before Bunker Hill, they had a play on, I think, which was Seneca's, one of
Yes.
Seneca's plays. But that play wasn't called Seneca's The Art of War. That play was not about that, right? And you kind of
Right.
go, so I feel like this is nitpicking that's going on as well, and that bothers me. But it's funny because you mentioned Margaret Atwood. So her book was recently banned in Alberta, a western province here in Canada, out near British Columbia. And interestingly, now I should say they've rescinded that order so far. But it's interesting to me because the other thing that got me was there was no reason given behind the list, and one of the key reasons why the list was retracted was because there was no reason given. And so then it's like, well, where is that coming from? I I just don't I just don't know that I could ever be a practicing Stoic and think that it's okay to do this, to shut out some kind of wisdom. Even if all the book is telling me is what somebody else might be thinking, I might disagree with it, but I can understand their viewpoint more. And, not to continue to go back to where we started, but with the Sun Tzu comment of, knowing your enemy. Well, I mean, how else will you understand other people's points of view? Right. And
Yep.
that's an interesting way overall is to think about this. Is just like, if you only know one thing, then you're apparently the genius of the universe, but the universe is a lot bigger than one person, right?
Right. And the play you're referring to was done before
Yeah.
Valley Forge.
Valley
It
Forge.
was done in a blizzard. And it was a play about Cato, right? So Cato is like the quintessential Stoic soldier.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just because he was a Stoic soldier. It was because he was trying to push back against Julius Caesar and what he knew would be a totalitarian government,
Yeah.
and that he lost, and that he committed suicide because of that rather than submit. So many think that if you go back to the time, George Washington had no idea whether he would win, right?
Right.
In fact, if there was, Vegas gambling betting on him, they probably would have bet against the U.S., or I should say, the colonialist winning the actual Revolutionary War. So he
Yeah.
was probably doing two things. He was showing, what it means to be the quintessential Stoic soldier to his men, but also the consequences should this not work,
Right.
which, in the case of Cato was a noble suicide if you want to look at it that way.
Absolutely. So when we talk about this, there's the question I really think we should be asking ourselves is what are we trying to do with the diversity of these books that are out there, right? In some ways I don't care as much about why somebody wants to ban something because someone's going to do it whether or not I say anything, and same with you. But I'm curious about this idea of a question like why do we think why do we think it's so important that books like this are included, even if they have like one thing we hear a lot about, let's just get this on the table, is a lot of people say like, well, this has explicit content and this is no good for children or something like that, right? Which is an interesting topic to talk about. You're a parent.
Yeah.
I'm not a parent, though I have recently had children come into my life, right? And I think that'd be an interesting thing to talk about. But I think as well, it's just like, why do we think it's important to have all of these different books and things out there? Because I can say it's bad to ban books all I like, but ultimately, someone wants to ban something,
Yeah.
we're going to
I
charge
mean,
them.
that there is I think, as a parent, or even if I wasn't a parent, having some kind of rating system to me wouldn't be
Yeah.
anything wrong with, like we do with movies, right? So explicit concepts that at least parents should be aware of. And if they don't want their kids learning about that kind of stuff too early, I certainly think I'm not telling parents what they should, how they should view that. But, you could simply, if we're talking about in the case of public libraries, if a person is under a certain age, just like you get into movies, right?
Yeah.
In the old days, right? If you were too young, you either couldn't get in or you had to have your parents' permission to get. And we didn't have NC-17 when I was a kid, but now you have NC-17, right? So I think that's the worst. But yeah, that's not banning the book. It's simply giving, warnings that it might
There's
contain
a
things
restriction
that,
on it.
yeah, for a parent, you wouldn't want your child to. But it's not just the explicit content, but let's face it.
Yeah.
The internet's, Jesus.
Worse than a library now.
Yeah,
Far worse
it's
than
the
a library.
worst. Yeah, right. But it's not that what they're trying to ban. They're trying to ban alternative viewpoints, right?
Yeah.
That's what the concern is. You can easily say, okay, we'll have a rating system just like the movies on books, and that takes care of that. But what the problem is, if they're banning books that simply disagree with their perspective, and that's for both sides, right? And even if
Yeah.
it's obviously wrong, even if it's um, Mein Kampf, right, from Hitler, like
Yeah.
if that's the book that everybody would pick to say like nobody should like it, right? Because it's Hitler, for
Right.
Christ's sake,
Yeah. For
right?
sure.
But you still don't ban it. You
No.
don't ban it because
Well,
then
interestingly,
the
yeah.
people need to be able to read how that happens,
Yes.
right? So they can stop it from happening again.
Mm-hmm.
Two, if you ban it, those people who are inclined to it might become more interested in it. Then it's a banned book,
Yeah.
right? It's just dumb all the way around, whether
Yeah.
it's, Martin Luther King's Letters from the Birmingham Jail or Mein Kampf, Hitler's memoirs. It should
Yeah.
be, you should be able to act, especially as an adult, in any case, in any type. If
Yeah.
not, you're not an educated society, you're an indoctrinated society.
Absolutely. And interestingly, and this is covered in an episode of 99% Invisible, which is one of my favorite podcasts of all time. And most people know it. Roman Mars is the host. They speak in that episode about something called the medicine cabinet or the poison cupboard, I think is what they call it. So in Germany, people would expect that the number one banned book in Germany is Mein Kampf,
Right.
and it actually
Yeah.
isn't. Funny enough, it is the most restricted book in the country, but it's not the most banned book. It's in what they call the poison cabinet, and it's basically it's a room where there are restricted books. I think a lot of them follow along that kind of doctrine, but you can go to a library and you can check it out. You just can't take it out of the library, and you can read it there and then leave. Right, so they're fully like, we have it, you can see it. All we're saying is like we make sure that it's not being handed out to 9-year-olds, right? And it's so funny because it's such a stark contrast to just straight up like, don't go in there, right? And I hate to be the guy who says this, but it's it is true. Like, if you were to take this for a different part of the view of towards children and stuff like that, right? In places where they teach only abstinence, right, teen pregnancy rates are always higher than where you have sort of open
Right.
teachings of like all the different things around sexual health and whatnot for a human
Yeah.
being. And
Yeah.
and I think it's kind of the same. It falls in a similar or parallel thing where it's like you can arm people with knowledge. I do believe that knowledge is power. You can arm them with knowledge and teach them things that they have wisdom about it. But you can't teach them anything if they don't know about it and they just ignore it, right? And the indoctrination is an interesting one. Like, I had an interesting conversation to relate to Stoicism. I had an interesting conversation with someone about why Stoicism is a philosophy and not a religion, since there are a lot of people who are big proponents of it. And I said, well, we could talk about it.
Mhm.
Like, there's no dogmatic side of it where it's like, this is what it says and you're not allowed to discuss it. And I think, many people benefit from the discussion parts of a philosophy like this. And so, but I do think that applies to a greater society where you have to say, look, if we can't even talk about it, then we are already losing the game fighting against it. Right. And, that's the challenge that I have right here. So many people I know, and it'd be interesting to get your take on this, Stephen, too. And I was saying it earlier, is so many people say things like, it's so polarized now, like we can't talk about stuff. And I'm always like, I
Hmm.
don't think book banning is helping that, because you're basically
No.
saying don't talk about things, right? And you kind of go, well, my thing is I relish the opportunity to talk about these things with someone so that I can help them find a good way and I can debunk stuff. Most people say it's Rousseau, and I don't know if it is him actually, but there's a statement which is, I may not like a thing that you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it.
Yeah.
And I'm the kind of person that looks at that and says, great, let's talk about it. I had a conversation with someone who, we were talking about the Middle East, and we were talking about Gaza actually, and I said I totally disagree with your statement on that. I believe that what's happening in Gaza right now is horrible. I'm not negating the actions that started the whole thing from the Palestinians on the Israelis, but what I'm saying is what's happening in Gaza today is horrible, and they didn't really like that. And I said, fine, but we're talking about it. We're not yelling at each other. There is something better to be had when human beings converse than when we ignore and just avoid, in my opinion. But I'd love to hear your take on it though, because I think we have to keep talking about these things.
Yeah. So agree. I mean, I guess you could think of it this way. Are you the person in a party that, can talk to people that disagree with your perspective? Um,
Yeah,
do you have the ability to do that? Do you immediately just wait your turn to shoot them down on all their terrible ideas?
yeah,
Do you actually absorb what they're saying and challenge your own thinking? Can
yeah,
the conversation keep going? Or do one of you get super pissed off or do you get super pissed off and walk away? If you're not that person, then perhaps you should be. Right.
yeah,
Now, I'm not saying I'm the perfect person like this, but that's what I would challenge myself.
yeah.
Can I listen to people who I don't think it's a great idea to ban books? I don't know, just since that's what we're talking about. One, I think it was a course, but it was certainly part of a course I did when they were talking to. Oh, you still there, buddy?
Mick, did we lose you there? Welcome back. It sounds like it's oddly enough that we were at a very good point in the conversation. Then Mick's internet dropped out, so we're back now. So welcome back. So, but we were talking about being able to converse about things and whatnot. So, Mick, if you wanted to go back to what you were saying,
Yes, I'm just saying you should challenge yourself, and I do, to be able to talk to people who disagree with you in a way that's not competitive,
yeah,
right? Because that's the way it is now. People just wait for the other person to stop talking to say their
absolutely,
points, and with no real desire to learn why the other person thinks the way they do. And I was going to say, I was in a course once where when you were having debates, you had to repeat the other person's position and why they held it before you answered, right? So you think there should be book banning because of the dangerous messages that could get to children and have a negative effect, whatever they said, right?
yeah,
So you say that before you then say your
yeah,
position on that.
yeah,
And it was very disarming, I have to say. It did make you pause and
mm-hmm.
calm the hell down before you launched into because so much of today's debate seems to be more like,
Yeah,
Mortal Kombat, especially on the internet, right? Um, so that's one way I would say that's very stoic, of course, maintaining calm, listening to the other side, having the wisdom to potentially challenge your own opinions. Um, I think it's completely imperative that we go that way because if you aren't, and the same thing, I mean, you could expand this not just to book banning, but also limiting news sources, blocking news sources, blocking access to information in general. It's a progressive thing, right? Where you start with book banning and end with a social, what do they call it in China? You have a social rating score that if you fall under, they start cutting you off from basically society because everything's online now, right? So that's at the far end. But if you're headed down that direction, you're going in the wrong direction. So I would hope, especially in democracies, one, we should push for everybody to live in a democracy, I think. but especially in democracy, you preserve it by ensuring that you defend Mein Kampf just as much as you defend, uh, you know, the Federalist Papers, right?
Yeah,
Which was the
absolutely.
foundation of the, Declaration of Independence for the United States.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think I'd like to use a real world example here to talk about why it's really important to be able to have these differing views come in and everything too. So I work with the space program. I work in space safety, specifically human rated spaceflight safety, which is the top one. And in history, right, we have had bad things happen in the space program. Absolutely, the three big ones you always hear about in the West are Apollo, Challenger, and Columbia, which were major disasters
Yes.
where you experienced loss of life of astronauts. Two of those were astronauts in some kind of space flight of some kind. But what's interesting is coming out of the space program had three big programs leading up to the moon landing: Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. And
Mm-hmm.
Mercury and Gemini were pretty good, but they did have some failures on flights. If anybody's seen the movie First Man, they cover one that Neil Armstrong had, where their capsule starts spinning and they have to essentially cut the mission short because they're going at 1 RPM. So or it's not 1 RPM. Sorry, it's one rotation revolution a second, so 360 RPM. So
Holy
you're
mackerel.
basically spinning like that. And what they did in the Apollo era was they said we need to make sure that anytime we change something on a spacecraft, anytime we change something on a design, that we have people who are experts that come in and make sure that we haven't forgotten something or missed something, and make sure that we're not in a just a go get it done attitude. That make sure that
Mm-hmm.
we're checking it to make sure that it's good and verifying it. And they instituted something called the Apollo CCB, the Change Control Board, which is actually it's an acronym we still use in the space program today. And the Apollo Change Control Board was, so I have a design for a capsule, and I'm going to change the door. I'm going to make the door 2 centimeters wider. I have to show up to this change control board, and it's a huge room with like 400 people in it, or no, sorry, it was more like 100 people in it. And then there would be extra people in the background who would be helping, like consult and everything. And you'd have to say, I'm changing this because of X and Y and Z, and we think it's going to be okay because of A, B, and C, and da da da. And then after usually the first hour is your presentation, and the next 7 hours of that day is basically everybody in the room, just as a friend of mine used to say, throwing rocks at it. And
Mm-hmm.
you get people, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, people who specialize in human health and performance, which is like astronaut safety and stuff like that. And their job is to literally sit there and say, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? What about this? What about this other thing? We changed something somewhere else and it might affect this. How do you know what's going to happen? Right. And, that really took shape in Apollo, especially after the Apollo 1 fire, because the Apollo 1 fire was caused by certain things being overlooked, like 100% oxygen atmosphere, which is obviously very flammable. And so, but once the change control board went, Apollo ended up having, being very successful. There was Apollo 13, we know there are issues there and whatnot, but the change control board was seen within NASA culture, and now the wider space program culture, about bringing other views in is nothing but good, because it's checking you, it's checking yourself, it's checking your work, it's checking your plan, it's checking your next steps, right? And if we don't do that, we are in a vacuum and not learning anything. And I when stuff comes through my company and the space program stuff I work on today, it goes through a change control board, and it has to, because we need to make sure that the right eyes are looking at it and that we're
Mm-hmm.
challenging what this thing is doing. So I just thought I'd throw a real world example in there, because if we continue to talk about this in big things, right, it's hard for people to grasp it. But in my everyday, I need people to tell me when I'm wrong. I need people to tell me when they think something different than me, because I am only better for it, as it were. So
Absolutely. Professional contrarians, right? You
yeah,
have to have that. They do that in all sorts of contexts. A red team, to basically look at what you've done and look at it from every angle to make sure, especially something as important as space flight, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
this, it's anything goes wrong, as we've seen, as you've pointed out, Adam, can have catastrophic consequences. By the way, so I don't forget, I did get a chance to brief Senator Mark Kelly on the stuff we do with the humanitarian and the vets. He, as you probably know, and his twin brother were NASA astronauts.
That's
And when
right.
you walk into the first part of his office, he's got the full suit.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, so if we're ever in DC together, of course I'll have to ask him, but I think because of your with the Canadian Space Agency, and he knows me, we should be able to go in there and see it, and hopefully
Yeah.
you can
Oh
meet him
wow.
because he's a hell of a guy. Actually,
Yeah.
help try to get us some of the aid that we're throwing away for a different podcast. But I just don't forget that
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I'm sure you would find that pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I'm,
I
I'm
think I
meeting with an
mean,
astronaut next week from the CSA, so it'll be fun.
right on. Yeah, yeah. I think both him and his brother. I guess one of the things that was really helpful for him was they were twins, like identical twins,
That's right.
so they could test one that spent a lot of time in space while the other was still on the ground. So
Yeah,
yeah,
they could compare physiology, right? Yeah.
actual Irish twins, right? Oh,
There you
twin
go.
twins. Yeah, but
Yeah.
this is a topic that we should keep coming back to because
Absolutely.
this is a trend that I think is increasing.
Hmm.
When it increases in democracies, that's hugely troubling.
Yes.
And if you don't have the capacity to read something you disagree with, or you think, you know, somebody would think differently than you want them to think if they read a book, then need to rethink your own positions and whether you are truly a wise person or a person who just wants to indoctrinate other people into your way of thinking without any critical thinking of your
Yeah.
own positions.
Hmm. Totally agree. And yeah, we are going to have to keep coming back to this because it is a growing trend and we have to be careful of it. But we should wrap up there. And so I'll say thanks, Mick, for letting me walk this topic on earlier this week. We'd love to hear from everybody else out there. So write us, check out our website, but write us at info@pubandporch.com. You can find us on Twitter and social media. But we will hear from you all soon. So thank you, Mick. We'll talk to you the next one.
Thank you, Adam. Till next time. Thank you for listening to the Pub and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pubandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pubandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pub and Porch out.